So what you're looking at here is the results of my first build out of the drivetrain for my e-board build. It's not awful, but there are some things about it that I would like to improve. So I'm going to rebuild this whole thing. One of the things is I don't like that my motor pulleys are close to the end of the shaft. I want them to be closer to the motor. And I also don't like that the tension on my belts are different. And if you look closely, you can actually see where the motors aren't even lining up. So it's a little detail that just bothers me. So as I rebuild this and correct these errors and just make it more to my liking. So I'm going to show you my rebuild for this in fast motion, and I'll pause it periodically from time to time to point out some of the flaws or some of the mistakes that I made and some things that you can do to do your build out without repeating the same problems that I had. So here we go. Now, I forgot to mention in the previous video that you shouldn't follow my advice if your goal is to build the lowest cost electronic skateboard, because that's not really my goal. I care more about the hill climbing power. I'm over 220 pounds, and I want to know if I can build a board that's going to get me up hills easily. So that's my goal. My goal is not really to do it the cheapest way, and that's should be pretty obvious to you if you're paying attention to the things that I've been doing. So for my drivetrain build, I actually had to build this over again because I didn't do it very well the first time. But I was able to fix my mistakes, and I'm pretty happy with what I've done so far. So for my drivetrain, I have two 180 kV motors that I got from MBoards, and they're 6374s. So 63 is the measurement of the diameter of the motor, and 74 is the measurement of the length of the motor. Now, what I would recommend is that you go with either a 6374 or 6355, or there's even a 6384 size motor. And I recommend the 63 diameter because the bracket or the motor mount is specific to the size of the motor. So my recommendation is just get the larger motor mount and the larger motors. I'm using 120 millimeter all-terrain wheels. Now, I don't really have an expectation to do a lot of all-terrain riding. However, I want to be able to go into grass or run over small rocks and sticks and know that I can do that with confidence, and I'm not going to break my neck doing so. So I got these large wheels for that purpose. For the trucks, I have the extra wide trucks that I got from MBoards as well. Now, just a note on MBoards. I'm using them because two reasons actually. One, they have very, very high quality equipment. And secondly, they have a kit builder. And with their kit builder, you can really build out all your components and be virtually guaranteed anyway that everything will work together nicely. And that was one of the things that I really wanted, and one of the things I really liked about it. So I'm willing to pay just a little bit more, for my equipment for that benefit of knowing that everything's going to go together nicely. So I'm using their trucks, their wheels. Actually, all of this is from MBoards. There are some issues that I ran into when building out this drivetrain. Now, they're not issues with the actual equipment. There are issues with my knowledge on how to build this out. Things that are probably obvious to others that have done this before, but for me doing this the first time, I was learning a lot of things on the fly. And I'm going to share those things with you so that you don't have to repeat the same problems that I had. So I have 6 major lessons that I learned from building this out that I want to share with you. The first lesson is, so when you look at all this, you might ask yourself, okay, where do I start? Start with putting the motor onto the motor mount. Start there first, and that's going to be 4 screws. And these 4 screws, put them on the outermost hole that's available for them, and use thread locker to lock down all of these screws, because the vibration from skateboarding can cause those screws to work their way out. So that's the first 2 tips. Put the motors onto the motor mounts first. Second tip is to use thread locker. For tip number 3, so each of the motor mounts has 3 screws, and those screws are for tightening and loosening the tension on the belt. Now, this might be an obvious one, but position these screws initially in a position where this belt is fairly loose. In fact, put it on the loosest setting possible. That'll make it easier to set everything up going forward. I spent a lot of time just trying to put this wheel onto here with this belt, and I couldn't because the belt was too tight. Before I realized, just loosen the screws up so it can go on easier. So that should save you some time. Okay, tip number 4 is to set up the motor pulley so that it is close to this bracket for the motor mount. Now, I set mine off just a little bit farther than I should have because I was concerned about the belt clearing these nuts right here. But as I re-examined it, I realized that I could have actually set it much closer to the motor, and it would have been just fine. But that's tip number 4. Set these motor pulleys up closer to the motor itself. Okay, tip number 5. Now, this took me a long time because I was doing a lot of fooling around trying to get these things to line up properly. And what I finally ended up doing was basically moving the motor mount out of the way. With the belt off, I put the wheel all the way onto the shaft and screwed it down tight. Once I did that, I used a pin, and I just made a mark right on the truck to show where the wheel pulley was going to come to. From that point, I took the wheel off and then moved this motor mount over to the point where that mark lined up with the inside of my motor pulley. So that gave me a good alignment between my motor pulley and my wheel pulley, and made this thing line up a whole lot easier. So that's tip number 5. Tip number 6. So once you put the belt on and you put the wheel on and you screw things in and you get things to the point where it's pretty close, use these 2 screws on the motor mount to make the last minor adjustments. You can loosen those up, and you can just inch this over a little bit and get this to the point where it's right where you want it. That's the easiest way to go about doing it. Now, you got to get it close in the first place. Otherwise, it's going to get all wonky on you and it's going to be hard to do. But if you get it close in the first place, then you get the belt on, then you can make little minor adjustments, bring this in or bring it out a little bit in order to get everything to line up just right. So that's tip number 6. And that worked out really well for me once I got that figured out. So those are my recommendations for building out the drivetrain. I hope you like this video. In my next video, I'm going to be building out the battery box and the wiring for that battery box for my build. I should warn you, I'm not going for aesthetics in this, at least not in this initial skateboard build out. So, my battery box is going to be quite ugly, but it will be functional. And that's what I'm going for. I'm going for functional first. I'm going to make sure everything works the way that I want it to. And then later on down the road, I'll go for something a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. So don't laugh when you see my battery box, but it's what I plan to do, and I'm going to have fun doing it. Thanks. See you next time.